Hi, welcome again. And today we're going to talk a little bit about self-criticism and what happens when we criticize ourselves in the wrong way from an early age, and what kind of things that turns out to be in adulthood. And adulthood, for purposes of our discussion here, really starts very, very young. In my own experience with children, I treated them as adults in a sense from the age of 7. As soon as I felt they could tell right from wrong, then I try to relate to them in that way as adults. Now, that obviously doesn't mean that I assume a lot of knowledge. It's my job to help teach them. But it does mean that there's a certain way of approaching things. And really what it comes down to is reasoning. Now, if you look at Piaget's 4 stages of development, and I'm going to come over here so that you can see them right over here. The last two, the two that I'm really going to be interested in, are the concrete operational stage and formal operational stage. Concrete operational is where you start really reasoning with a child. They're capable of some of that. They'll sometimes apply it in humorous ways, but they can do it, and that's what we've done. Formal operational stage is really adult reasoning and behavior. It's the last stage, and at that point they are really, for all intents and purposes, adults, and that's starting at 11. So coming back here, what we're going to talk about is, again, self-criticism. So we've all met people that couldn't take criticism, that the slightest thing puts them in a tailspin, very, very sensitive, easily upset, easily offended, very hard. If they're working for you as an employee, they're very, very hard to work with, because if you say anything, like on a job review or anything, they get very, very defensive or very upset. They can be very disturbed by office politics, rumors, and they can contribute to a very unstable office. If they're a child, if they're your child, you may find that they're withdrawn. They won't tell you about things because they're afraid of that criticism. So let's take a look at a few things here. I've got a few notes. When they're older, you may not realize this is the problem anymore. But if you have a child that is getting involved with bad companions, you're starting to see problems with drugs, with sneaking out, with just doing the things that are not really good for their safety. Maybe they're starting to get into trouble with the police a little bit. Maybe this is the problem. So I'm going to start, strangely enough, with what was inscribed at the oracle at Delphi in Greece, and that was "Know thyself." It's a very important thing for us to help our children get to know themselves and become used to the idea of looking at themselves and seeing what they're doing, and not doing that in a way that is overly critical, and also that they know what's material. They know what it is that they should be critically evaluating in themselves, what things are worth being even upset with themselves about or feeling guilty about, and knowing what things should never provoke guilt, knowing what things really are not worth criticizing. Typical is children will sometimes be critical of their body, and sometimes that's something that somebody has put on them. If you're a parent and you make remarks about your child's looks, even positive ones, can communicate the idea that that really matters the most. And then as they see imperfection in themselves, or think they do, then they start to have a problem. So we're going to talk a little bit about prevention later on. But we can listen for these signs with younger children and try to do our best to get around it. I've had a variety of experiences with mine, but they don't seem to have had a huge self-critical bent in a bad way, except maybe one that did and dealt with it reasonably well. A lot of it, you just do a lot of reinforcement. I am going to say that in all this, the answer is going to be love to everything. And it doesn't mean some theoretical love, but practically speaking, if a child doesn't feel loved, they're going to feel insecure. One other thing about that is that insecurity, that self-criticism, a lot of it comes from lack of guidance, but also because Maybe they haven't been taught to look outward as well and to have compassion for other people, to look at what's going on with other people more. They have nothing better to look at than themselves. Not just other people. I remember that one of the things that we did was to try to give the kids a lot of experiences, well, not a lot, but experiences that were out that made them forget themselves. Not in the sense of distraction, but things where there was something bigger to see. Going to Yosemite was a great experience. You get out there and you see the mountains, you see the trees, you see all this, and it takes a person out of themselves a little bit. And of course, it's all in how we interpret experience. If we interpret it that, look at how wonderful this is. Look at all this magnificence over here. I mean, this big mountain and everything else. Look how insignificant you are. Well, that's really not very helpful. On the other hand, if you're looking at it and saying, look at all this beauty and everything, we get to enjoy this, and okay, now let's go hike and have a good time, it's a good thing. All right. Zimbet talks a little bit about some of the reasons, maybe. What I really want to focus on, though, is the self-accelerating nature of this self-critical child. And of course, if you're listening to this and you're very sensitive, and people have said you're overly sensitive, and anything that somebody says about you can put you in a tailspin, or that you feel you need to please everybody. If somebody invites you to a party, if somebody wants you to drink with them, smoke with them, have sex, whatever, you just feel you have to do it because you don't want to disappoint them. Well, then you're probably trapped in this, and let's see if we can figure a way out together. So looking at this, the reason it's self-perpetuating, self-accelerating, is because once a person starts to do this self-criticism over every little thing, there will never be a shortage of things to make them feel worse. And as that person feels worse, if you're this person and you start to feel worse about yourself, you probably will find it's harder to get along with people, or that you're more uneasy, that you start to have some anxiety issues around people. You may find you have some trouble in school. Maybe you are a loner and maybe you just go off and hide. Okay, then that may help you do better in school. It's possible. But on the other hand, a full and complete life, there's a lot of components to that. And if you find that you're either becoming increasingly lonely because of the self-criticism and the inability to believe anybody would find you interesting or pleasant to be around, or on the other hand, if you have started to do poorly in school, then that gives you even more reason to think that you're bad, or to think that you're somehow incomplete or defective, or however you want to put it. So that increases the self-criticism. It's one more reason. And the more of those reasons that happen, then the more you feel lousy. And the more you feel bad, then the more poorly you do. And the more poorly you do, the more reasons you have. So you can see that this is a self-perpetuating cycle. And breaking out of that is exceedingly hard. Now, there's nothing more important than a parent when the child is younger to take care of this. But there comes a point where it goes out of control. The parent hasn't done, frankly, their job. And now the child's really got a problem. Now, there's a few other things that might happen here. This will escalate, as I said, because it's a self-feeding problem. But if the child finds something that distracts them, something that makes them stop looking at themselves, then, if it's a good thing, it may help. But it may not really help even then. If they become obsessed with sports because they just want the praise maybe of achievement, it's not likely because they're probably going to not do as well because they're going to be overly critical. But let's say that they have sports and they're doing that. They could have a very, very tough coach. There's some problems that have occurred with that. But the idea is that if they find something like partying, going out and getting in trouble, hanging with bad companions that distract them and keep them from thinking about themselves, they will go down that road. And you may be very shocked at the things that you thought, the values that you thought you implanted in them aren't going to be there anymore, because those values aren't helping them. They're not making them feel better. I'm not saying that all our values should make us feel better. What I'm saying is they're not helping in this particular area. The only thing that's going to help is for that child to be secure in who they are. And the only way that can happen early is if parents accept them and treat them that way and build that strength. And encourage them to accomplish things in simple ways that make them feel good. So I have a friend who had a son, and her friend had a daughter. And the teacher one day asked the daughter, who was 4 or 5 years old, what her name was. And the girl told the teacher that her name was Dammit Dion, because that's what she heard from her mother all the time. And not calling her that, but that her mother was constantly unhappy with her. Now that little girl's going to have problems. What's funny is that I've actually thought about writing an article on this someday. Maybe I will. Dammit Dion and Good Job John. When my youngest son John was growing up, from the time he was very little, everything was good job, John. And we tried to affirm the things he genuinely did well, even reasonably good attempts, because I didn't want to have a child that constantly thought that they were failing. And no child is constantly failing when they're small. When they're small, the standards for them are so small that they fit, and there's no reason to constantly be telling a child that they're doing poorly. If they are doing poorly consistently, we need to question what we're exposing them to. What maybe we need to find something they can do well. But for goodness sakes, find something that child can do well. Now, I'm kind of going back and forth between the parenting side and the actual experience. If you're listening and you've got this problem with being overly critical, I'm hoping that if it's you, you can see where this escalated itself and where something maybe intervened that gave you a way to distract yourself. I have friends that are addicted to drugs, sadly, or have been addicted to various things. And sometimes those addictions are physiological addictions because they're pleasant, and it has nothing to do with being sad or self-critical. But sometimes they really don't care about the substance. They just want the social affirmation and the noise so that they don't talk to themselves, so they don't look at themselves. So something to think about. If you recognize this in yourself, that's great. Obviously, as I said before, it spirals in because everything that happens confirms one's own poor image of themselves. And there's really, the only way to break out of that is to start having a higher opinion of oneself that's real. It probably takes somebody being very close and very loving to support them. Now, if parents haven't done this early on, it's probably not going to be apparent. And the problem is if they find someone who does accept them, who doesn't have their best interest at heart, who in fact may use them, then you really have a problem, because you're going to become very attached to that person. And you may see this in your own life or in your child's life. It may seem like an irrational attachment, but they're looking for an anchor. They're looking for some kind of thing that they can hold on to and that will guide them away from looking into themselves. All right. So this takes over one's life, and everything becomes about not hearing that inner voice and probably not being terribly sensitive to other people's needs either, because except as it makes you feel better. So what do we do? This is the problem, is how do you solve it? The solution is to get to know the pattern, get to see this as a problem in your life, and then to start to look inside and find which of these criticisms are real, which ones are just invalid, which ones are meaningless, and be able to look at oneself with courage and be able to deal even with the things that are not good when looking inside. That's tremendously hard. If you're blessed with someone that will listen to you and that can ask questions and who will not let you plunge deeply into pointless self-criticism, that's a wonderful gift. Write to me. I mean, if you relate to any of this, obviously, I'm very happy to get messages from anybody. But it's quite difficult. Maybe it helps if you can start listening to that critical voice and determine which of those things are really important. And of course, if you could do this, you would have done it by now. But maybe it hasn't occurred to you that some of those things are meaningless criticisms. If you're worried about your looks, stop. Don't worry about your looks. Your looks are not that important, but more importantly, this is not an appropriate thing to criticize in yourself. I mean, if you don't like the way you've got your hair cut, okay, yeah, it's changeable, but it's not that important. So vanity is really where one is far too critical of themselves in appearances. And appearances are not just physical appearances. There's also how we look to other people socially. Do we look like a nice person? Do we look like we're stupid? Do we look like we're smart? And very often the self-critical person will not improve themselves in a way that takes hard work to look better to others. Sometimes they do. But very often, hard work is a hard thing to do when you're self-critical. It's hard to get good at anything. I think about all the times that I've tried to improve my guitar playing or pick up some other instrument or get good at a sport, and I get so frustrated that I can't make fast progress. And some of my children have shared this with me as well, and other people that I've known. It's very, very hard for me to start something, and all my life I've given up on a lot of things that I really wanted to learn, but I couldn't get results fast enough. Now, for the self-critical person, that's a far bigger problem, because everything that you try is confirming that you're not worthy. Everything you try and then don't show fantastic progress, you just say, well, obviously I'm a loser. Obviously I don't know why I even have any friends. Why would anybody like me? Because look at this. But it's not reasonable. You've got to be rational. The development of the rational mind in a child is not something that, in my opinion, is not something that does well in this country. We're not teaching people to be rational. We're teaching people to react on emotion. We're teaching people to react to marketing pitches. And very often just making assertions rather than arguing and saying, you have to believe this. And it's like, why? Well, you just have to. And we see that a lot in society right now. We've got a whole Congress that's just not functioning as well as it should in the past, and certainly not functioning. I don't think the government's functioned well for a long time. Where there's just not a lot of really clear thinking. Certainly even among candidates, it's not always clear. But the rule for the country right now is assertion. Sorry, that's a little commentary. And by assertion, I mean that somebody will say, this is the way it is, instead of presenting an argument. Or they'll present a false argument, some kind of a thing that has some logical fallacy in it. And then everybody has to believe it. And of course, marketing and the culture is really pushing that right now. Going back to solutions, I would say number one is to get rid of criticisms, of self-criticisms that are not material. They're not important. Especially that means things that you can't control. If you don't like your nose, I know people can get plastic surgery. Don't. If you don't like your nose, forget about it for now. Okay, maybe you want to think about it someday, but right now you can't afford it. You've already criticizing yourself too much. Understand that if you've got a problem in school, if you have a problem at work, look and see whether that's by your own self-criticism, if your own insecurity is sabotaging your efforts. If it is, you have to give yourself a pass on that problem. Now, you still have the problem. I understand that. You still have a situation maybe at work where other people don't like you because you've just been overly sensitive. But rather than feel guilty about it, just understand this is a consequence. This is a side effect of the real problem, which is the self-criticism, the lack of security. So you have to just kind of separate that one out and say, instead of saying, oh, nobody likes me, just let that go. Go to the core behaviors. Go to the core problems. Go to core values. If you're a dishonest person, if you find that it's really hard to tell the truth and at work it gets you in trouble and people don't trust you anymore, the fact that they don't trust you is not the core problem. The core problem is you're not telling the truth. Why aren't you telling the truth? Is it because you're afraid if you tell the truth that somebody will get mad at you? Look and see, is that rational? Will they really do that? And if they do, you may just have to develop that courage and take the chance and do it. There are skills that you can pick up to deal with that. But if that's the problem, okay, that's a real problem. Being critical of yourself for being dishonest is a reasonable thing to be critical about. Write them down. And if you can get help from somebody, I think it's fantastic. But if you can't, really, really look. You can send me your list. But really look and see, are these all things that you can control, that are important, really important, and that are not coming from your lack of security, not coming from your self-criticism, that are not coming from you sabotaging yourself? If you can approach it that way, it may be a start to self-recovery. I wish I could tell you lots of success stories. I find people generally don't get out of this well. But that doesn't mean you can't. And if there's anything I can do to help, I'm happy to do it. If you feel that counseling is a possibility for you, I would just try to be very, very clear what your problem is, and be very, very honest if you talk to a professional. If you have a religious professional, I hate that term, priest, rabbi, minister that you trust, that's fine. Caveat here. People that are in the business, they're supposed to be in that business of helping, sometimes don't help. In fact, some of those people exploit. Sometimes they take advantage of people, either to feel better about themselves or in ways that are somewhat more earthy. Do be very careful. And while we're at it, let's talk a little bit about molestation. One of the things I was very aware of raising children was that if my children were not secure and happy and talkative, they were a better target for molesters, for pedophiles. And in practice, I think that worked out pretty well. I don't, we never know for certain, but we're fairly certain that everybody was okay. I do have some personal experience with that when I was a child, and I tried to draw on that experience to protect them. The thing about it is, a child that is not sure of themselves, a predator can feed on that. A predator can then increase it and tell them more reasons why they're unworthy. And, oh, you're so lucky to have me. And, oh, I'm going to take care of you because nobody else really would want you, so you get to be, somebody for me. It's a very horrible thing that happens. So if you've been molested, try to think about it in those terms. That did they prey on your insecurity? If they did, then understand that they took something from you they shouldn't have taken. They abused you by using a weakness that was in you that you were not responsible for. Parents, you were supposed to take care of this with your child. You're supposed to make them strong. You're supposed to make them secure to the degree you can do that. But if you're a child and now you're grown and you went through this, it's not your fault. And if you're insecure, if you're self-criticizing, it's not your fault you're that way. It's your fault if you continue longer, if you keep doing this, if you won't make the steps to change. At some point, it becomes your responsibility. And I'm not saying you're culpable. I'm not saying that you should be blamed or anything else. I'm just saying the solution is in your hands. If you want to have a better life, if you want not to be abused by other people, if you don't want to walk around always feeling like you deserve a bad deal, and why does everybody treat you so badly, but on the other hand, it's okay, why do you put up with the things that you have to put up with? If you don't like that, then maybe this is something to look at. Anyway, I hope that this is helpful to somebody. I'm always happy to get messages. I know that this won't appeal to some people. Some people will be very upset. I'll listen to you all. Like I said, this is my view. It's based on my experience. I'm not a mental health professional. I don't claim to be one, and take this for whatever you think it's worth, coming from just another person like you, who maybe sits around and thinks about this stuff too much. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me.